Welcome to the Christian Chronicle podcast, where we explore what's happening in churches of Christ. I'm Wes McAdams, and I'm here with Marcus Stinson to bring you the latest news and honest commentary. If you want to hear stories about churches of Christ, where we've been, where we're headed, and how God is working, this is your podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show today. Excited to get into it. I'm here with Wes McAdams, as always. Today we're looking forward to chatting about weeping with those who weep, mourning with those who mourn, and rejoicing with those who rejoice. But before we get into that, I want to introduce our other compatriot today, none other than the Bobby Ross Jr., the editor of our Christian Chronicle, is our guest today. Bobby, how you doing today?
Well, it's, I guess, my first time with you guys since you started doing this, and you're doing such a remarkable job. So it's great to be here with you.
Well, we've been looking forward to having the man himself in the room with us, so to speak, digitally anyway. So we're going to have a good one today.
Great.
Excited to get into the news items. But before we do, the disclaimer that we always like to give is that the opinions that Marcus and I express are those alone and not necessarily those of the Christian Chronicle. But Bobby, we are interested to hear about what are some of the things going on in churches of Christ right now.
We've had a couple of stories that I was actually blessed to be a part of, published in the last week, that we've gotten some good response on already, and I think people would enjoy seeing. One was Ephraim Rodenbach, who was our intern this summer, and he was based in Middle Tennessee, and most of us here at the Chronicle, we're here in Oklahoma City. So Ephraim was remote, so I had not ever met him in person. Even though he's done such a great job and been probably the most prolific intern we've ever had. But he met me in Idaho, this little rural town in North Idaho, about 40 miles south of the Canadian border, where these two ladies who had connected maybe 20 years ago. They became close friends when both were members of a Church of Christ in Great Falls, Montana. You know how people in the church, you just connect and you kind of become like lifelong soulmates, and then maybe you don't live near each other for 20 years or see each other. There was a little bit of that involved with them. And way back when they had said, what if we started a school to just kind of help kids who are in need and kids who need Jesus and kind of maybe have some other things going on in their life. And so, they had that conversation 2 decades ago, and life goes on and that doesn't happen. And now, you can read about this in the Christian Chronicle, but long story short, there's a thriving Christian school and what these Christian women see as a mission field here domestically, that there's just some exciting things happening, and it was inspiring to me. And then I made a quick trip to the Bluegrass region of Kentucky, flew into Louisville, and then drove to the Cane Ridge Meeting House on Saturday, which, if you people who are familiar with Restoration Movement history much at all will know there was a big week-long gospel meeting there where people who were Baptist and Methodist and Presbyterians all came together and basically decided, with Barton Stone and some other ministers through the preaching, that, we've got these creeds, we've got these confessions, we're doing all this denominational kind of things, and we've really gotten away from the true meaning of Christian unity and just preaching Jesus. So that was quite a formative event in forming what became known as the Restoration Movement, and then even the main branches of what we would call the Stone Campbell movement today, including those of us in a cappella churches of Christ, would fit into that. And then some of us have differing opinions about whether to acknowledge the Restoration Movement at all. Some of us are like, all I need is Acts 2:38 and go back to the first century, and we don't need to worry about all that history. And then I think there were others who would say that, yes, the first century church is important. Yes, we want to do biblical things in biblical ways, but if we just try to go straight from AD 33, as the sign says on some of our buildings, to 2026, then we may miss a lot of understanding of our history, and also some lessons that would be helpful even today. We just went to press the day before we're recording this with the print version of the Chronicle for September, in which that Cane Ridge story will be on the front page.
I think one of the most amazing parts of that story that you did about Cane Ridge was the age of Barton W. Stone when that happened. I had no idea that he was 28 years old when that happened. It just kind of blew my mind. And I was thinking back to when I was 28 and kind of feeling humbled, like, man, I wasn't doing anything like that, like starting a movement that helped to change the fabric, not just of congregations within the Restoration movement, but even in many ways, the fabric of this country, like what they were doing and the way that they thought about scripture, the way they thought about following Jesus has really affected more than people might realize, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And it is amazing that he was 28. And I don't know if it's just the way photography looked back then or if the pictures we have of Stone and Campbell, if we've just got like the old man versions of them. But you're right. When you think, man, he's 28, I'm sitting here thinking I've got kids older than that. So that is crazy. That's an excellent observation.
Yeah, I had a full-blown existential crisis when I turned 30 because I realized, man, Jesus was starting his ministry right now, and I still have no idea what I'm doing with my life. At 33, I was like, man, Jesus accomplished everything that he was sent to accomplish, and I still have no idea what I'm doing with my life. Yeah. But I found that to be such an interesting facet of a lot of the folks that we stand on the shoulders of, Stone and those guys in the Restoration movement included. A lot of the founding fathers of this country, we envisioned them because they were wigged out with the style of the day, but those guys were in their 20s in many cases as well. And it's just sometimes really interesting to think about how much things have changed culturally when we start to make big moves in our lives. But I'm really glad that story was something that we shined a light on. I've found that there are a lot of segments and swaths of our brotherhood that are unaware that Cane Ridge was even a thing. That might be the first time that they even read about it. And whether we want to start the clock at the, AD 33 stone engraving on our building or not, I feel like many of those would not exist if what happened at Cane Ridge didn't happen at Cane Ridge. So the attitudes and posture and disposition, as you were talking about, Wes, of those men and what they kicked off in this country around that time is something that we owe a lot to.
To add to that, Marcus, I think sometimes we forget the lenses that we inherit from those who come before us. I know sometimes we don't like to admit that we're reading scripture through a lens. We like to believe that we are just coming at it without any bias, without any preconceived ideas. But it's really helpful to say, where did this framework, where did this lens through which I'm reading my hermeneutic, to use a big fancy word, but where did that come from? And then when we acknowledge it, when we see it, then we can begin to analyze, is that the best framework? Is that the best hermeneutic? Where it is good and where it is healthy and where it leads to Christ following and being spirit filled. What other stories do you have for us, Bobby?
The other one I think that would be good to mention is Calvin Cockrell, who's our managing editor. He has a story about a church fire, the Troy Church of Christ in Michigan, which seems a lot of people have had connections with that based on what I've seen on social media. Had the minister wasn't awakened. He has 6 children, and his youngest was having some kind of issue like 3 a.m. So they got a call from police saying, hey, your church is on fire. And he got over there and, the church is ablaze. And, sadly, given the number of churches of Christ we have in the U.S., that probably happens several times a year. We hear about that happening. But in this case, it was a massive bad fire. The good news is nobody was there. Nobody was hurt. But, obviously, the church is not a building. But when you lose your building, it's emotional. There's fine, you have to deal with, baptisms here, weddings here, that kind of thing. And you got to deal with what's the insurance situation, where are we going to worship, just a lot that goes into that. So Calvin's got a great story, kind of just catching everybody up on what happened there and how the congregation is doing.
That's devastating. It's a reminder of exactly what we're talking about in this episode, that I like to think of our church building as our shared house. And just like when a family's house burns down, it is emotional because there is so much tied up into it. You can say, well, it's just a house. It's not really your home. Home is where your heart is, or whatever. But we get tied up in places and in buildings and all the things that happen there. And our church building is where we share our life, like you said, Bobby. So when we lose a church building, it's more than just brick and mortar. It is our shared heritage, our shared story, and the house that we share together.
Yeah, it makes it really tragic, because for as much as we know that, we aren't the building, those are memories. There's sentimentality there. There's something about being human, and I think God put this in us, where we want a place where we can belong that has permanence. And that's, part of what we get to look forward to in that day when the kingdom comes in full. It seems like in life, the places that we attach ourselves to for whatever reason as time goes on eventually get stripped away. And sometimes you just find yourself feeling something, even if you're driving by an old field that is now a strip mall or something like that. You're like, man, that just doesn't feel right. So our hearts go out to that congregation up in Michigan that has lost their building. Incredibly difficult, I'm sure. Really thankful that nobody was there. And we look forward to seeing the entire body rally around them in this time. And that's kind of what we want to talk about a little bit today. And I think that's a good springboard for that conversation, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, before we transition just a little bit, I want to remind people that if you want to follow this story and others, you can visit christianchronicle.org or keep up with the Chronicle on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. Before we get into what we call the potluck segment, I want to read our scripture, Romans chapter 12 and verse 15, where Paul says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep." It's a reminder that when we gather, we don't just gather to worship. We do gather to worship, but we also gather to share our lives with each other. So that's the theme of our potluck today. And our potluck segment is where we each bring something to share, because it's been a blessing to us and we think it'll be an encouragement to you. And even before we get into our potluck, a reminder that if you, the listener, if you have any potluck items you would like for us to share on the show, please send those to us, and we would love to get into those and share those with everyone. In fact, I've got some potluck items that have been shared with me that I want to share with all of you later on. Marcus, what did you bring for potluck today?
I'm kind of like you. I've multiple items because I really wanted to sort of canvas some of the relationships that I have and kind of feel what was out there. There's so many anecdotes and personal experiences that I have that I could point to of the church being at its absolute best, especially in times of trouble. And it's really is life-changing. It'll change your perspective on all of life and what real relationships are meant to be. Quite recently, a couple of years ago, tragically, my very first week when I got to Leander down in Texas, on the Wednesday of that week, a 7-week-old baby girl was found to have a liver situation that they couldn't get a handle on. And by Saturday, she was gone. And it was one of the most devastating moments. But I tell you what, I have never seen a group of people rally around a family that was just obviously devastated, but confused in the way that I saw our family rally around this family there and walk with them, not just for days and weeks, but months. And the grieving is not linear. We do not all grieve the same. We do not all heal the same, but we all bleed the same. And there were just so many instances of going above and beyond. I had so many folks bring something to the potluck for me as well. A good friend of mine shared an instance where his brother-in-law was battling cancer, and multiple churches around the Charlotte area showed up to be with the family there in the waiting room at the hospital. There were over 150 people there on one occasion, so much so that the fire marshal came and told them that they were a hazard. That's the level of support. Without a doubt, when people are hurting, we certainly know how to mourn with those who mourn and grieve with those who grieve. And it's extremely powerful. My friend who shared that story with me said that it was a big part of restoring his wife's faith, who was really struggling at the time with why God could let something like this happen, I imagine. And so that's what I wanted to bring today. Just example after example. I'm sure if you're listening, you can think of instances like this as well.
Thank you for sharing those, Marcus. You brought up something that I think would be helpful for us to talk about for just a second. And it's the other side of that coin of yes, we need to weep with those who weep. We need to grieve with those who grieve, but also Paul says to rejoice with those who rejoice. And you made an observation about that maybe we don't do that as well, ironically.
Yeah, it feels like sometimes joy or rejoicing is the most scarcely found fruit of the Spirit. in our fellowship. And I had several people actually mention this to me. And I think part of it comes from the fact that we don't like to make things about ourselves. So there are lots of things that could be celebrated and should be celebrated and rejoiced over that maybe we just don't know about because folks don't want the attention, right? And so we sometimes make it hard on our family to actually celebrate with us because we don't want to make it appear like, it's hubris that's going on. I think pretty much every congregation I've ever been associated with in any capacity is constantly celebrating baby showers or wedding showers, or we find those life moments to really celebrate. But I think Paul is getting at something even more than that too. The day to day, the small life wins, the stuff that happens behind the curtain, so to speak. I think we ought to be rejoicing in those ways too.
It made me think that I think sometimes, in addition to what you pointed out about the arrogance or the pride or the hubris, I think sometimes we avoid the celebration because we don't want to offend those who are weeping. We don't want to offend those who are hurting. And so if somebody is expecting a baby, they are hesitant to share that because understandably and commendably, they are wanting to protect the feelings of those who lost a baby or those who had a miscarriage or those who can't have children. I struggle with this when it comes to Mother's Day every year, and I preach a sermon on Mother's Day, and I don't typically focus on that throughout the sermon, but I will start by acknowledging that, hey, today's a day of celebration, and I know many of you are celebrating, but it's also a day of grief, and it's hard for many people. And I think that there's a tension there that sometimes we resolve in favor of those who are hurting. And I think sometimes we neglect to rejoice, and we don't allow ourselves the freedom to say, hey, I may be hurting and these people may be hurting, but these people are also celebrating. And for the church to really be a family, we need to be able to bring all of that to the table, both our sorrows and our joys.
I'm thankful that there seems to be a little bit of momentum behind speaking with some discretion and some tact to make sure that the folks that are hurting in instances like that are acknowledged.
Yeah, absolutely. Bobby, what did you bring for our potluck today?
Well, I'm going to keep it real, and I'm one of the people who showed up at the potluck and forgot it was potluck day. I've in 21 years at the Chronicle, we get a lot of death and disaster, and been to a lot of wildfires and tornadoes and hurricanes and all of that. And it's always sad. It's always tragic, but there's always, even in those circumstances, it's amazing to me how much hope you can find. And even, I'm thinking of being in Southern California last January with Christians who've just had in Altadena and Pasadena and that part of the Los Angeles area, but I had huge chunks of their city wiped out, and was interviewing one Christian woman after service on Sunday morning whose own church building had been burned. And she just had so much hope in Jesus, despite all that had happened. And then, I think about Matt and Macy Collins in Cookeville, Tennessee. Matt was a youth minister when a major tornado struck Middle Tennessee in 2020. I think right before the COVID pandemic started, but their daughter, 4 years old, was killed in this tornado. And obviously, you can't imagine as a parent or their grandparents you can't imagine anything so tragic. Yet Matt and Macy have emerged from that to start a ministry where they kind of use their personal experience to help other parents who lose children, be it through natural disasters or through illness or other means. They've kind of even through their own heartbreak found a way to share hope. And one of the things I mentioned, as I was thinking of, as Marcus was talking about celebration, one of the things that Matt and Macy point out is that, when you do go through something tragic like that, you're not going to remind me when you mention my daughter that my daughter died, because we don't ever forget that. That's always in the back of our mind. But, her birthday, we're going to be thinking about it. Help us celebrate even then, or, the anniversary of the tornado, or, just milestones. There are ways, as far as grieving with people who grieve, that I'm sure that for the rest of their lives, they're going to be thinking about those certain dates. So in some ways, that one way you can grieve with people who grieve is to remember even after the rest of the world has moved on, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, man, that's so good. And I love what you're saying That story of Matt and Macy, was it?
Man,
In
Mason
Cookville?
Collins.
Yeah, just such a great example of how what we go through will equip us to be able to actually mourn with those who mourn in a way that can connect with them that nobody else can. And how beautiful that is, just an instance in which you can know that if God allows you to go through it, he intends to use it. What a cool story. Thanks for sharing that, Bobby. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's rich. For somebody who didn't bring anything for the potluck, you shared a lot. It reminds me of last night, the brother who brought our lesson at our summer series. He talked about how God protected him in a horrible car accident that would have taken the life of anybody else. Like the people who saw the wrecked car were just shocked that he was able to walk away from it. And as I listened to his story, I couldn't help but think, well, what about those who did lose loved ones in accidents like that? And how are they hearing this? And I was feeling sensitive for them to think, well, how come God protected you, but he didn't protect my loved one? He didn't protect the people that I love in a situation similar to this. And it really is an act of faith, I think, to be able to say, I am happy, I am rejoicing that God is working in these ways and doing these things for people, even if it's not me personally. And I long for the day when Jesus makes all things right, when God does for all of us what he has done for a few. It goes back to even to the ministry of Jesus. Like Jesus didn't heal every single sick person who was on the earth at that time, but he healed some as a sign that someday God is going to do for all of his people what he's doing for a few now.
I actually wrestled with this past year. I was looking at the instance where Jesus heals the woman with the issue of blood. And for the first time, I recognized that this happens in the midst of another individual chasing Jesus down because their child is on their deathbed. And he's trying to get Jesus to rush to get there to save his child. And Jesus stops to help this woman. And as Jesus is interacting with this woman, the guy gets word that his kid has died. And I just put myself in his position for the first time and thought, if I was him, I probably would be thinking, you have time to stop and help her, but you couldn't get back to help my kid. Now, of course, the story ends with Jesus actually healing the child who survives. And that's just a picture, I think, that no matter how it looks for us right now, in the end, the healing of God is always on time. And things will be put right when it's all said and done. And it is an act of faith, as you're saying, to trust that and hold to that, even when we are in seasons of mourning and seasons of grieving. And how beautiful is it, and how thankful am I that we have a family that mourns with us and grieves with us and rejoices with us and allows those really difficult things to turn into beautiful blessings and redeemed parts of brokenness that we get to see and walk through each and every day.
With that in mind, I just want to read some of the responses that I got. I got so many on the Radically Christian Facebook page when I asked them. For Jeff Luplace from the North Mission Church of Christ down in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. He said, every Sunday we end with the challenge to spend time in prayer with one another. If you see someone who needs prayer, go ask them if you can pray. If you are in need of prayer, ask someone to pray for you. We've been doing this for a few years now. It has become a part of our church environment. Now, most people don't rush out the door after an assembly. Instead, people stay praying for one another, sharing burdens, building fellowship and relationship, rejoicing with those who rejoice and weeping with those who weep. And those who regularly take part have been blessed by the experience. I loved this account because it's a reminder that it's not just the preachers and elders who can pray with you. We don't believe in a select priesthood of clergy. We believe in the priesthood of all believers. And to see a community like this, where they're not just responding to an invitation. I love the invitation. I love elders getting to pray over people. That's a biblical thing to do. But so is every member praying with and for each other. So I love this picture that this painted of a church community where they don't rush out the door, but instead they stay and pray with and for each other. It was beautiful. I also got a voicemail from a brother named Winston Smith. He's the youth minister at the Beach Hill Church of Christ. I won't read the entire voicemail, but he said he grew up in this congregation at Beach Hill. And he came back later after he, when got his education, different things. And he came back and now he serves as their youth minister. He and his wife had a son. Their son's name was Theo, but unfortunately, even during pregnancy, they knew that Theo was going to have a lot of health issues, and he passed away at 7 months. And the church was there for them through every stage of the complications and every stage of hospice care. and even in the passing of their son. And then they found out that they couldn't have any other children, which was another devastating blow for them. And the church was there with them. But then they started the process of adoption, and they adopted a young boy and his biological twin sisters. And he was celebrating that. And here's what he said at the end. He said, "Our situation made me aware of how united the body is in times of grief, sorrow, loss, and celebration. We are one. When I needed a shoulder, one was there. A prayer, one was uttered. Encouragement, some was given." And I really appreciate Winston for sharing both the heartache of losing a child and the heartache of not being able to have other biological children, but the celebration of being able to adopt children and bring them into their family and their home. And what a tremendous blessing it was to have a church family who was there with them and for them through all of that. I want to remind everybody that we would love to share your stories, your questions, your comments in the next potluck segment. So if you have comments, questions, or a story you'd like for us to share, you can email us at podcast@christianchronicle.org. And coming up, you're going to hear from the intern we were talking about earlier, Ephraim, and what it's like to be part of the Christian Chronicle staff. Bobby, I'm afraid he's going to share some behind the scenes stories about what it's like to take a road trip with you, but I don't think you'll be too embarrassed about that.
Are there going to be Ranger games involved?
I'm not sure, but he's going to reflect on his summer internship with the Christian Chronicle and what a blessing it was to get to see and hear some of the stories of churches of Christ around the country and the world.
Churches in the United States face many challenges. Where can they turn? Heritage 21 serves churches of Christ as they navigate important decisions about their future. This nonprofit aims to encourage faithful kingdom stewardship by offering general consultation, legal review, and facility and real estate support for churches of all sizes. Whether a congregation decides to renew, repurpose, or replant, the Heritage 21 team provides experienced guidance for every stage of church life. To learn more about how Heritage 21 serves within God's kingdom, visit heritage21.org/chronicle. That's heritage21.org/chronicle.
If you'd like to hear more from me and Marcus, tune in to the Radically Christian podcast. It's available on YouTube or wherever you find your podcasts. For 2 months each summer, 1 or 2 students have the opportunity to intern at the Christian Chronicle and report on events in churches of Christ around the world, something that the Chronicle staff has been doing for over 83 years. Ephraim Rodenbach, a journalism major at Middle Tennessee State University, was one student who got that experience the summer of 2026. He recently finished his internship with the Chronicle after reporting on congregations and Christians across Tennessee. Those of you listening may have read Ephraim's words online and in the paper for the past few months, and today you get the opportunity to meet him. Ephraim, thank you so much for joining us, brother.
Thank you, Wes. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have this conversation. Let's talk about your internship. You got to report on congregations in Tennessee. You got to travel to Idaho with the editor-in-chief, Bobby Ross Jr., for a story. What are some of the interviews that you did that have been the most memorable for you?
I'm sure we'll talk about it here in a little bit, but I was given the quote-unquote health beat. So it seemed like anytime there was something about someone going through some health challenges, that was kind of my thing. They were like, hey, go for this part in Tennessee or go here and go here. And that was honestly the coolest part for me, was kind of meeting people where they are. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of time in journalism, especially some of the stuff I did on campus, was very much, well, I'm talking to you about this, but you're going to people's congregations, you're going to people's homes. You're like, hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about your story. And it's a very different kind of story than the sports journalism that I do at MTSU. It's very much, you're talking to people very personally about their story. That's not as structured. Getting to meet people kind of there is awesome. But I think probably the most memorable story I did was either my scout story or the multitude of stories I did on the health beat. I know one really memorable one was with Chris McCurley, Cancer Can Be a Ministry. That was an awesome story. I texted Bobby, was like, hey, you want to do this story? And I'm like, yeah, okay. So I texted him, come to his office, and we sat down and talked for probably 2 hours. And we just talked, and he gave me some awesome quotes. There was something along the lines of, if I beat cancer, this isn't a Chris McCurley story. This is a God story. Mm-hmm. And that quote's always going to stick in my head. It's one of those things, you're sitting there, you may be drinking your coffee in the morning, reading your Bible, and it's like, that's kind of what that means. Because you make those connections, and it's like, that's why this person thinks that way. And I thought that was pretty neat. And you talked a little bit about Bobby, and I love Bobby to death. But we went to Spokane, Washington, the seafood capital of the Northwest, and we get Red Robin and Olive Garden. So personally, not my favorite thing, But it was just kind of like, hey, can we go try this? He's like, no, there's a Red Robin right across the road.
Man, I'm with him though. I like seafood, but Red Robin is hard to beat, especially those endless fries. I don't know if they still do that, but
I
man,
think they
the
still
fries
do
are
that
pretty
in
top
most
notch.
states. I think they still do those. But I'm very much I want to find the most like hole in the wall, like when I travel. Like when I went to West Virginia, it was very much what's the like most local restaurant I could possibly find. And that's just how I travel.
That's awesome. Well, Chris McCurley is a good friend of mine, and I love what you said about him, and not just about him, like you said, what God is doing in his life and through him, and even through this challenge, this health difficulty that he's had. Let's talk about Churches of Christ in general. Has there been any of the interviews that you've done or the work that you've done through this internship that has changed your perspective or your thoughts on Churches of Christ in any significant way?
So I think a lot of it for me was scale. I come from Baghdad Church of Christ, which maybe has, 50 people on a good day. And it's a middle small town Tennessee. There's probably not a Walmart for 45 minutes. You have to drive down the interstate and go get there. But a lot of it is scale because I've been everywhere from Owen Chapel Church of Christ in Nashville. That has probably, I would say, about 100 people. Then you go to where Chris McCurley's from, Walnut Street Church of Christ, where there's many more people. There's hundreds of people. And my experience with Churches of Christ have always been very small churches. They've been very, I've known you for 50 years or, I've been here my entire life. And it's been really interesting to see the scale and kind of what churches are doing. Like a most recent story I did over senior ministry was we're over here giving resources to everybody in Nashville. The Harper Hills Church of Christ is a resource center for aging. This has everything from Grief Share to the Sunny Day Club, which treats Alzheimer's and giving caregivers some time off. And it's like all of that ministry is coming out of one church. Where I'm from, we don't really get to do as much of that because we just don't have the resources. And being able to talk with people in Nashville or, when we went to Spokane and talked about the foundation school, there's all these people in the Churches of Christ that are doing things that are much bigger than kind of I realize their work. Because you hear about if in Baptists and others where they have, the children's shoe boxes and other things like that are kind of more national efforts. And it's amazing to see how Churches of Christ are doing their individual ministry, but also working together with other congregations to kind of put those on. And interviews like that with these people putting something like that together is so cool because they're doing it on their own. They have God pulling on their hearts.
And that's exactly why I appreciate the Christian Chronicle so much, because it's so exciting to hear about what's happening in our fellowship around the world. Like you, Ephraim, I grew up in small congregations. I thought anything over 60 or 70 or 100 people was big. And now preaching for a large congregation, it still is kind of overwhelming to think about all the things that are happening just at this one congregation, but to think about all of the congregations throughout the country and throughout the world, and the things that we're doing, like you said, individually, but also that we can do collectively, and we can cooperate with each other and work on these different projects and different ministries and missions around the world. So it's so exciting to watch that and hear stories about that. So thank you for the way that you have reported on and helped to celebrate the good things that churches have been doing.
Hey, I just did the easy part. I just typed the words down. All these people doing all the work and putting all their effort and faith into it. If you're willing to meet me, in a church parking lot at 7 a.m. in the morning or call me and do things, that's the hardest part. I can wake up whenever, but it's amazing that people are so busy and they're just willing to I want to make sure that this story gets out because they're so willing to just tell those stories and kind of connect the church. You don't see that in every part of journalism nowadays where everyone's trying to come together and tell a story. It's very, people against people. Conflict is always out there. But in the church, in the Christian Chronicle, which I've had the blessing of doing, this is the most impactful work that I've ever felt I've done. Because, you're telling people, you're telling their stories, and it's going to other people. It's doing other things. I mean, with that, I did a story over 3 minutes to save a life. I got a text after that story published from my mom. And of course, she comments on everything. She's like, oh, you're doing such a great job. You're doing great. But she was like, people in our church are going to get, extra safety precaution equipment. They're going to look into a plan like that. And that's so cool as a journalist because, you do these sports stories or you do something at school where it's like, okay, great. But people are actually using this for the betterment of their own congregations and, preparing for things like that. That's such an awesome thing for me.
Like you said, there's so much that other people and other congregations can learn from what other people are doing or how God is operating in one place and lessons that they can take away from that. So sharing these stories is so significant and important because we get to brag on what God is doing, but we also get to learn from each other. Let's talk a little bit about the medical side of things, the health beat, as you called it. Let's talk about that and what you took away from specifically reporting on the way that Christians have used their health situation or their diagnosis for the glory of God and to serve and to minister to others.
A lot of it for me was going back to that Chris McCurdy quote. It's a God story. It's not very much, I have this thing and this is why I'm telling you this thing. It's not, they're rather taking that experience and being like, this is what God's doing for me. It's never, this is happening because of God. No, God is doing this through me, through this, so I can preach to you. And the couple stories that I did, it's always God is doing this through me. God is guiding me through this. I have complete trust in God. And, all those things, whether it's people, the church coming together, supporting them, or it's, them getting a good, CT scan or whatever it could be. It's always about God. And every single story that I did, that was the main component. Of course, this illness isn't great. It's not the best for me physically, but, there's no fear in that. Like, I know I did a story over Mitchell Bowles in Salina, Tennessee, and he is a 17-year-old, goes to Clay County High School, and he was like, I have no fear, and with his cancer, he's like, I know God has written my name in the Lamb's Book of Life, and I have nothing to be afraid of. What an amazing message that is. Someone who's, my age, a little bit younger than me, sitting across the table and just saying that to me, it's like, wow, his faith is so strong. And, as a Christian who I've been very blessed with great health and, besides me being like a 2-pound premature baby back in the day, I've been really great. And it's like, it's amazing to see that faith from someone my age. And how inspiring is that? You're going through something like that. You're battling all these challenges, but yet you're still putting God center. And you're like, that God has got you. And I think that's something as Christians we could do a better job of, because we always, I'm doing this at work or I'm doing this. Well, in those situations, they're much more, I trust God. We can't always trust God, when we're in our worst points, when we're struggling or doing this. Why not do it at your highest too?
It's such a reminder that life is filled with these ups and downs, and that even when we come together, so much of church life happens on Sundays and Wednesdays when we gather together. I think sometimes we encourage people to leave all the stuff they're going through at the door and not to bring that in. And you say, we don't want to be distracted by all of the things that we're going through in life. I say nonsense. I think that when we come together, we bring our whole self. We bring all the stuff that we're going through. We celebrate the wonderful blessings and the wonderful highs, but we also lament the lows, and we pray with each other and encourage each other.
And I think one really impactful thing for me was when I was at the Scout Jamboree. There was somebody who said, among the words of, I don't want to quote him for sure, he said, everyone brings their burdens in the camp. It's very much look, there's chaplains there to greet you, absolutely, but we know you may be coming in with something. I've done scouts for a very long time, and you have people going through things, and that may be their one chance that Sunday morning to kind of talk about people and talk about God and talk about faith. And, we all have things going on, and I think exactly what you said. Sometimes it's, leave that at the door, come in here with, the open mind and, but we've all got things that we can tell about, even if we don't really realize what's going on. And we can talk about what God is doing in our lives, even if things aren't necessarily going the way we want them to. That's the whole point of the community of the church, is to kind of bring each other up in the faith.
Absolutely. Amen. You mentioned scouting. Let's talk about that for just a second. Like, tell us your history with scouting, and you recently got to go to the Jamboree and report on that. So what was that like with this history you have personally with scouting, but also as a reporter now?
13 of my 19 years of my life has been devoted to scouting. I started when my mom forced me to go when I was 6 years old because I didn't really know much better. And then I did that for a while. I was in the Cub Scouts for a couple years, and my mom, our den leader, stepped into that role. Okay, now my mom was in it and I was in it. And then my dad stepped into it. So now all three of us were in Scouts. So that was kind of the hook. We were stuck. Because then we moved through Cub Scouts, so you go through, all of the different things. You go through Tigers, Wolves, Bears, Webelos, and then Arrow of Light. Then you graduate and then you go into the Boy Scouts, or I guess Scouting America as it's called now. And you go through all the different ranks and then you get all the way up to Eagle. I had a really awesome time in the Scouts. I mean, leadership, you talk about the merit badges, you can talk about the knots. I don't remember every single knot that I've ever done, but I probably know a lot more than most. And it's actually helped me out a lot more than you would think. A lot of those, I've shot football games before with my camera and I've had to tie things to posts, and it's just little things like that. It's like, okay, so that does come in handy. But I've done so much in Scouts, and after I got my Eagle in 2021, so I was 14 at the time, a lot of people tend to drop off after that. They tend to go do other things, whether it's sports or, college or whatever it may be. And I decided to stick around. I was kind of a pseudo adult leader. I helped around a bunch of younger Scouts. And I also joined this really neat thing called the Order of the Arrow, which is the National Honor Society of Scouting. The National Jamboree every 3 to 4 years. It's pretty expensive, and I never got to go. And me and Bobby were kind of going through one of the papers. We're like, hey, there's this Members of Church for Christ for Scouting ad. Isn't the National Jamboree coming up? I'm like, well, yeah, that'd be pretty neat. And he's like, oh, yeah, let me call this guy and let me see if we can get something going. And I ended up getting in contact with Steve Letty, who was the past national chairman of MCCS. And he was like, oh, yeah, we'll take you to Jamboree. And I was kind of sitting there like, what? I'm going to Jamboree. Like just like that. It's kind of one of those things like you walk in there and it's like, oh, wait, I'm really here. Like I'm actually here. Because you've got 14,000 acres of just quote unquote scouting paradise. I'm not wearing a scout uniform. I'm not wearing what I'm typically going to bring to a scout event. It's, I have a camera, I have a polo on, and that was kind of a surreal moment. You're there reporting on something that you've been wanting to do your entire life. But not only am I reporting on it, I'm kind of bringing, the gospel and representing the Lord in that moment. I'm filled with grace for God just being able to be there. And I would have never been able to do that if it wasn't for this opportunity of the Chronicle and being able to kind of work with people throughout the Church of Christ. And that's an awesome feeling, and being able to meet all these different people and talk about religion and scouting in a way I've never done before.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Ephraim. It makes me think about the fact that sometimes we expect every organization, every group that we're a part of to be the church. And this is a good reminder that scouting is not the church, but it gives you a great opportunity to be the church, to be a Christian in those spaces. And how important it is that if we are going to, at any age or any stage of our life, if we're going to be an influence on the world around us, we have to be participating in all kinds of things. And that really is where evangelism happens. That's where we get to represent the Lord, is when we build relationships with people that are based on all kinds of things. I think it's a great reminder that find the things that you're interested in or that your kids are interested in, build relationships with people in the world, and then bring your faith to that so that we can be salt and light in the world. We can't just isolate ourselves all the time and only participate in things or associate with people that share our faith. We have to go out there and be in the world. And the way that we do that isn't just, having a bullhorn or just knocking on people's doors, randomly cold calling on people. We can build relationships with people around other shared interests. And I think this is a great example of that.
And one thing that I've always come back to is, everyone hears the news about scouting. Everyone kind of knows, all the controversy that's been going on around it and all the things that have been going on. Whether you like it or not, there's 1 million people in the program. That's 1 million more people we can minister to. And you may not exactly agree with every single part of the program, but if we agreed with every single thing about everything, the church is imperfect. We can't agree with absolutely everything that's going on. But yet we still put time and effort into that because we knew that God tells us to do that. God tells us to go into these mission fields and find things and talk to people and evangelize. Why can't we do that in organizations like Scouting? They're not perfect. Nothing is, but we can do our best effort. At MTSU during my time there, you see a lot of evangelism happen in sports. You see the little pieces, the John 3:16s on the name tags, little things that they're doing to promote the faith. And how amazing is that it's not just organizations that are church sponsored, it's things outside of that are much bigger than that.
Well, speaking of sports, speaking of college, I know that before you came to the Chronicle, you were the managing editor for the student newspaper. So tell us about what's next for you, Ephraim. Now that the summer is winding down, what's next?
Coming into this fall semester, I'm going to start being a junior. So I'm a second semester junior. So I'll have about 1.5 years to graduate. And then I was working at the student newspaper from when I came in to now. And then I'm starting a job as an MTSU athletic communications assistant So essentially that'll do everything from taking photos to writing articles, so kind of doing a little bit of everything. And then after that, we'll just kind of see. I'm still involved with student government. I'm stepping into a parliamentary role there. I still plan to go to my home church at Baghdad Church of Christ. I love those guys. Me and my mom love going there all the time, and we try to spend as much time there. So that's about an hour and a half drive for me from Murfreesboro, but it's worth it. You come home fulfilled on the way home, and it's like, there's nothing better than that. It's going to be a fun semester, and hopefully get a job in sports media and whatever that may be. And maybe I'm blessed to, keep going with the Chronicle. It's been an awesome experience, and I'm so blessed to be able to get it. I'm not from Harding. I'm not from a Church of Christ school. So when I first got the call to come on, I was like, oh, really? You're going to let me come on? And now it's been such a blessing. It's been awesome.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you for this conversation, but more importantly, thank you for the work that you've done this summer. I appreciate all the reporting that you've done, and thank you for your work in the kingdom and that you will continue to do, Ephraim.
Absolutely, Wes. It's been awesome.
Thanks, brother. Thank you so much for listening. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or review today's episode. If you have additional comments, ideas, or suggestions, email us at podcast@christianchronicle.org. The Christian Chronicle podcast is a production of the Christian Chronicle Incorporated. Please consider donating to this nonprofit ministry at christianchronicle.org/donate and supporting our mission of informing, inspiring, and connecting churches of Christ around the world.